Hi there and welcome to Trauma Therapy and Why. The introduction into the video you're about to or hopefully watch is a segment in a time of my life suffering trauma and then dealing with trauma beginning in childhood all the way into adulthood. The life segments are broken down part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, etc., with part 1 beginning in my earliest memory in childhood, suffering trauma events, and then going through life with trauma to where I suffered PTSD at 12. At the end of certain segment videos, I will have a reference page with evidence-based research and neuroscience and their findings on the brain of trauma that leads to destructive behaviors. Hopefully you'll gain insight into yourself or maybe someone you know suffering trauma. If you haven't, please go over to my welcome video, which gives a deeper understanding of who I am, why I'm doing this, and the horrible quality of my videos. I'm trying to keep it raw, not only because A, I don't know what I'm doing, but also B, there's nothing clear or glamour about trauma and living life in trauma. So please subscribe, like or dislike, let me know what I can do to improve or how I'm doing with these videos. I look forward to your subscriptions and your comments. Hopefully you enjoy the video and continue into the other series. Thank you and have a good day or night. Of my life of trauma. And actually, my life of trauma actually can be said that it began even before I was born, when my mom was pregnant with me, which is known as prenatal stress. And it's very important for those of us searching if we have trauma or if we do have trauma and we know it and we've been diagnosed properly, to find out what it was like while you were a fetus. And I have supplied research, a reference page at the end of 3 important topics in this segment of my testimony. Prenatal stress. My mom was horribly beat by my father, an alcoholic, former Marine, and who just so happened had a job with the federal government. Being an alcoholic as he was, he ended up retiring 32 years in such a position. But anyway, so prenatal stress really has a lot of horrible effects on the neural development of the child. So before I was even born, I was suffering psychological disorders, also known as mental disorders. I don't like that term mental. I prefer psychological, even though it's the same, but that's the importance of words for some of us. Anyway, and then when I was born, I suffered what is known as birth asphyxiation. The umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. I was born dead. The doctor brought me to life. On the third swat on my behind, told my father. From what I was told my father, who happened to be there, one more swat and it's up to God. And boy, my dad said that I screamed like none of his other children. So I came into this world already with psychological disorders and fighting for life like I have my whole entire life. It's been a fight until trauma therapy. So birth asphyxiation, that's another thing that I recommend you find out from your family members if you're able to, because when we can understand how our disorders develop, when they develop, we can gain insight that it's not me. There's a reason for me being this way. Because so many of us, like me, including, and I do hope I'm the only one, but I'm sure I'm not. I always just thought, why am I like this? I'm just a freak of nature. There's no answers. But when you start to gain answers, you can understand that you began with these disorders and were never diagnosed. So there's a solution, which helped me greatly. And sadly, going through therapy, not I've shared this with all my therapists, and not one of them told me what birth asphyxiation does to a child and what prenatal stress does to a child. I found out when I was studying my master's degree in forensic psychology, and we were studying disorders and victim to offender overlap. I started researching me on my papers. And when I found this out, I actually had to bring it to my therapist's attention. The CBT therapist I was seeing for 2 years who did nothing for me, but it was someone for me to talk to. And she didn't even know. And therapists really need to know what birth was like for a client. Because if we can understand what happened at birth or before birth, we can see our issues started prior, and we're really, I hate to say it, we're not responsible, but we are responsible, but it's a major key. So anyway, born with that, starting life that way. I don't remember my father being in the picture till I was in the second grade. But before that, when I was in daycare, I remember vividly at nap time after lunch, we all went in a circle and we had to take a nap. This one girl, a few kids down from me in the circle, she was talking, and I remember the aides came in, the adults, and just swatted her behind. I mean, she was screaming I can just remember laying there like all the other kids, I'm sure, and just terrified. And every day after that, when my mom would bring me there in the morning, I remember clinging onto her leg, screaming for her not to leave me there. And I didn't know how to communicate properly to her. Long story short, she ended up taking me to another one. I don't know how long it was. That one was better. My first grade teacher, the first time I was in first grade, I ended up failing because birth asphyxiation and prenatal stress also causes conduct disorder, memory disorders, behavioral disorders, mood disorders, and you can see the references. Go to that site and read. So I had trouble learning, but that teacher was so mean to me, and I was in a play, and I was one of the main characters, and I messed up her play. And she just annihilated me in front of all the students after the play. And even when we were practicing during the play, I couldn't get my part right. And she would just annihilate me. And of course, her being authority, all the other kids started picking on me after that. Just a horrible situation. So these incidents can be counted as trauma. And I also supplied a reference for SAMHSA, which is a very good resource. And I suggest to go there, and it explains trauma, very easy reading. And I highly recommend that reference. So with suffering those two forms of trauma, I remember my dad beginning in the second grade. And what I do remember, he would be home and just beat my mom and my older brother, Mike, who was 9 years ahead of me. And we were the only two left at home. The other two took off when they were 18. And later I found out why. But I can remember my dad just beating them and then would leave for amount of days, come back to do the same to leave. Now, what's really odd, the times that he was there, my parents had a motorhome, we had a boat, and we would go out into the Everglades and go camping. And if you look through our family album, there's pictures of camping trips, bonfires, barbecues, fishing. And it looks like a family really has their act together. Like, wow, this is a great family. It's amazing what pictures can show. So that little bit about my dad, that's all I remember. I was terrified of him. And like I said, he was a former Marine, and he was grooming me to become a Marine. He would get me up out of bed at 2 a.m. and make me stand in attention and scream, Marine Corps, Marine Corps. If he can do it, I can do it. Just really sick stuff for a child. I mean, but the silver lining to that, facing challenges in my life, I always faced them head on, and I always overcame, even though I was doing it the wrong way, which you will learn later and my stories if you continue to watch. But just horrible. I mean, just terrified of my dad. That's another form of trauma, witnessing violent beatings. And I remember one incident, my dad was trying to get my mom to take a butcher knife in the kitchen. This is second or third grade. And he's just yelling at her to go ahead and just stab me, just stab me. And she's crying, and he's trying to get her to take the knife. And I'm just sitting there in my pajamas and just screaming, Mommy, Mommy, Daddy, Daddy. I mean, this was continual. And it was at that point in time I started to notice that my friends in the neighborhood, their household wasn't the same like mine. I mean, at dinner time they would sit at the table and they would all eat as a family, and I'd be outside the door waiting and just listening to laughter and giggling, and the father asking the son or the daughter, hey, how was your day? How was school? And I really started to notice, hey, something's different. This ain't the same, right? Because a child up to a certain point will believe this is the way life is, but they get to a certain developmental stage, and we're all different, where they start to recognize, hey, our household is different than theirs. For me and my older siblings, I was the youngest, we noticed our environment was different, no matter what the picture said. So this is up until the third grade when my mom finally had enough. I remember that day where she told me, go get your stuff. We're going to my sister's in Jacksonville. So that will be in the next segment. Thank you for joining. Remember, check out the reference page and pull those up and learn more about yourself. Thank you and have a good day.